Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun had not yet burned off the chill of dawn when the stagecoach jolted to a stop beneath the cracked wooden sign of Rustwood Station. Willa Zeller stepped down, boots hitting the dust like she was not sure the ground would hold her. The hem of her skirt was stiff with dust from the 3-day ride west. She clutched a faded leather satchel to her chest, her lips pale, eyes wide, standing out like a question with no answer in the middle of nowhere. She had not meant to come this far. Rustwood was not even on the map that the man in the Denver ticket office had pointed to. But the letter in her satchel, the one in her sister's handwriting, the one that said, "Come quick. I need help. I cannot do this alone," left her no choice. A boy no older than 10 ran past her, chasing a mule with a stick in hand, and she turned just in time to avoid being knocked over. Dust swirled, the air smelling of mesquite and sweat, and she coughed into her sleeve. Then she saw him. Up against the corral fence, one boot hitched on the bottom rail, hat tipped low, stood a man with a rifle slung across one shoulder and a look that could make the desert stop breathing. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, sun-browned like he lived outside more than in, and calm in a way that made her feel anything, but she tried to ignore him as she headed to the station house, but he followed. "You lost?" he asked, voice low and rough like gravel under wagon wheels. Willa stopped. "No, I am looking for my sister. Her name is Margaret Zeller. She sent for me." He nodded once. "Maggie's out at the edge of town. I can take you." Willa narrowed her eyes. "And you are," he tipped his hat back, revealing dark eyes that held too much and gave away nothing. "The one who can get you where you need to be." "That is not a name." He looked out at the wide blue sky, then back at her. The girl said, "I do not even know your name," she muttered in disbelief, almost to herself. The corners of his mouth twitched not a smile, but something close. "The cowboy said you will know it by sundown." She stared, caught between annoyance and curiosity. "You always talk like that." "No," he said simply, and walked toward the horses. She stood there 1 second longer, then followed. They rode out of Rustwood as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the dry scrub and the rust-red rocks. The trail was silent, except for the creak of leather and the soft clop of hooves. After a mile, she said, "Are you a friend of hers, of Maggie?" "I helped her bury her husband." "That make me a friend," Willa swallowed. "I did not know he passed." "He went west to find work, got caught in a flood near Yuma. She got the letter 2 weeks ago." Her heart sank. "And the children, she mentioned them in her letter." He nodded toward the rise ahead. "You will see." They came over the ridge, and below sat a small homestead, 1 room, maybe 2, surrounded by brittle grass and a tired fence. 2 children, a girl and a boy, sat on the porch steps. The girl was clutching a rag doll, the boy holding a stick like a sword. They looked up as the riders approached. Willa slid down off the horse before it fully stopped and rushed forward. "Maggie," she called. No answer. The girl stood. "Mama is inside. She sleeps a lot." Willa pushed open the door. Maggie lay on a cot, skin pale and cheeks sunken. Her breath came too slow. A damp cloth rested on her forehead. A kettle of water hissed on the stove, untouched. She knelt beside her, whispering her name, tears stinging her eyes. Maggie stirred but did not wake. "She has fever, been getting worse," the cowboy said from behind her. "Tried to get the doctor, but he is 2 towns over and never stays long." Willa turned to him, panic rising. "We have to do something." He nodded. "We will." The hours passed in a blur. Willa boiled water, cleaned linens, dosed Maggie with willow bark and cool cloths. The cowboy chopped wood, carried water, and kept the children busy, feeding them bread and beans, showing them how to carve little animals from scrap wood. By sundown, Maggie finally opened her eyes. "Willa," she rasped. "I am here," Willa whispered, holding her hand. "You are safe." The cowboy stepped onto the porch where the sky had turned blood orange and the air was still. Willa joined him. "You did not have to help," she said. "I do not leave people to break alone," he said simply. She studied him in the fading light. "You still have not told me your name." He turned to look at her fully, the light catching his face, sharp jaw, quiet eyes, a man who had seen too much and kept going anyway. "Xander Calloway," he said. She nodded slowly. "Willa Zeller." "I know," she smiled, just the edge of one. "How?" "Maggie talked about you, said you were the only one who never gave up on her." They stood there in the quiet, the desert going soft around them. Inside, the children laughed real, loud laughter. Willa looked back through the window, then at Xander. "Thank you," she said. "You are staying then?" he asked. "I cannot leave them now." He nodded once. "Good," she looked at him. "You came all this way, helped strangers. Why?" His eyes held hers. "Because you looked lost, and I do not like leaving lost people behind." Her breath caught. It was not just what he said, it was how he said it. Like he meant every word. She stepped closer. "You are not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you." The last of the sun dipped below the horizon, and in the hush of twilight something settled between them, not loud, not sudden. Just steady. Like the first stone in a foundation. She did not say anything else. She did not have to. The night air carried the scent of creosote and cooling dust. Crickets chirped low in the brush beyond the porch, and behind them, inside, Maggie's breathing had settled into something more even, more certain. Willa hadn't sat all day, but she stood now, leaning against the worn post beside Xander, letting the stillness wrap around her. "You always stay this late?" she asked, voice quiet. He didn't answer right away. "Only when I need to. You work cattle when they need working." She turned toward him, arms crossed loosely over her bodice. "That's not an answer." He glanced over, eyes dark under the brim of his hat. "I work for the Delaney spread. East Ridge toward the river cut. They run 36 head and keep losing calves to coyotes. I ride fence, clean water troughs, haul feed in dry months." "Then why are you here instead of guarding calves?" "They've got other hands." "Your sister didn't." Willa looked down at the steps. "I didn't think she'd be this bad off. I should have come sooner." "You came when you could." She didn't argue, but something in her jaw tightened. After a while he asked, "What did you leave behind?" She startled. "Nothing worth keeping." "That's so." "I taught letters and sums in a mining camp outside of Leadville. The boys barely listened. The men listened too much." Xander nodded once, not pushing. "I had a room above the general store," she added. "Used to sit in the window and watch the wagons roll through. I thought I was building something, a place to belong." He waited. "But it wasn't mine, not really. I was just tolerated." He shifted, adjusting the rifle strap on his shoulder. "You will be more than tolerated here." Her eyes flicked up. "That's generous for a man I met before breakfast. You're not the only one who's been edged out of someplace." He stepped off the porch, boots crunching dry earth. "Come morning, I'll bring fresh eggs." "The coop at Delaney's overflows. You going to bring a frying pan too?" she called after him. He looked back once. "If you ask nice." She watched him walk off into the darkness, the shape of him swallowed by the land as if he'd always belonged to it. Inside, Maggie drifted in and out of sleep. Willa sat beside her through the night, wiping her brow, adjusting covers, whispering soft things she wasn't sure her sister could hear. The children lay curled at the foot of the cot, exhausted but calmer now. By dawn, Maggie's color had improved. She even muttered something about the window being opened too wide. Willa stepped outside just as the sun broke over the ridge. She didn't expect him to be there, but he was. A burlap sack hung from one hand. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and the faintest sheen of sweat clung to his neck. "You said you'd bring eggs," she said, blinking against the brightness. "I brought more than that." He handed her the sack. Inside, she found a jar of lard, a twist of salt, and half a loaf of cornbread wrapped in a cloth checked blue and white. "You planning to feed an army?" she asked. He shrugged. "Figured it'd save you the walk to town." She nodded, slower than before. "You always this helpful?" "No." "Just today." She smiled, a real one this time, and he looked away as if unsure what to do with it. "I'll trade you," she said. "For what?" "You chop kindling while I cook." He followed her around back, where the woodpile slumped beside a dented tin washtub and a pair of rusted buckets. She set the sack on the table and began breaking eggs into a pan while he split logs with patient precision. "You always live in Arizona?" she asked without turning. "No, came down from Wyoming after the war. Cavalry, scouts." She was quiet, letting that settle. "You lose people?" she asked after a while. "Too many." He didn't ask the question in return, but she answered anyway. "My father died when we were girls. My mother remarried and left us behind." He didn't look up, but something in him went still. "Maggie was 16, I was 11. She kept me fed, kept a roof over us, then she married and I went north. She stirred the eggs slowly. I never asked how hard it was for her, I just wanted out. You're here now. I'd like to stay, if I can find a way to earn. He set the axe aside and wiped his hands on his trousers. You can teach again. There's a room behind the mercantile we use for Sunday services. Could be a school during the week. Children here even go to school. Some do, some ought to. She turned, frying pan in hand. You offering me a job, mister? Calloway, I'm saying the town could use someone who knows her letters. She studied him for a moment. You always speak for the town? No, just the parts that don't speak for themselves. Willa set the pan down and stepped closer. You always carry everyone else's burdens. I carry what I can. She reached out, brushing a flake of wood from his shirt front. That's a heavy way to live. He met her eyes, steady. Not if someone helps carry back. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Inside, Maggie's voice called weakly for water. Willa turned and disappeared through the doorway, the scent of eggs and charred wood following her in. Xander lingered in the yard, watching the line of sun stretch across the porch boards. He didn't leave. The morning passed beneath a sky the color of pale tin, the wind restless enough to stir grit across the yard. Willa stood at the washtub behind the house, sleeves rolled to her elbows, Maggie's linens soaking in lye water. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, but she didn't stop. The rhythm steadied her wet, wring, scrub, rinse. Behind her, the sound of children's footsteps moved in and out of the house, small voices carrying into the breeze. Xander approached without a word, a folded oilcloth bundle under one arm. He set it on the bench beside her and leaned back against the side of the house, arms crossed. What's that? She asked, not looking up from the tub. Books, he said. From the Delaney bunkhouse, most of the hands can't read, so they just gather dust. She turned then, frowning at the bundle. You brought me their cast-offs, figured you'd know what to do with them. She dried her hands and opened the cloth. Inside were 3 volumes, a tattered reader, a book of fables, and a dog-eared copy of Plutarch's Lives. She ran a hand over the cover of the reader. They'll do. I figured. Willa glanced up. You always this confident about other people's needs. No, just yours. She stared at him, lips parted slightly, unsure whether to be offended or grateful. He looked out toward the fence line. I fixed the gate. Was hanging by one hinge. I hadn't noticed. I had. She folded the cloth back over the books. You watch everything that close, only what matters. She stepped around the tub and stood across from him, the distance between them narrowing without either of them moving. You always speak like you're writing it down somewhere, he tilted his head. You always ask so many questions. Only when I'm trying to understand someone. He studied her a moment, then nodded slightly. That's so. She folded her arms. You told me about Wyoming, but not what sent you south. He didn't look away. Winter took my brother. Snow came fast. We were trapped in a box canyon with no feed. I rode out. He didn't make it. She softened, arms lowering. I'm sorry. He shrugged with one shoulder. I came south to escape the snow, found new ghosts. You don't seem the type to run. I'm not. I just walk away quieter than most. She stepped back, unsure what to say. He reached for the bundle, but she stopped him. Leave them. I'll show the children after supper. He nodded once, then turned toward the corral. Willa watched him go, hands still damp, heart unsettled by how he carried his sorrow like a part of his spine unchanging, but not dragging him down. Later, after Maggie took a few sips of broth and managed to sit on her own, Willa stepped inside the half-finished shed behind the house. It had no door, one wall still bare to the wind, but it had a roof and a plank floor and enough space for a few benches. She pulled a crate from the corner and set the books atop it. The girl, Ruthie, peeked in. Is this going to be a school? Willa turned. If you want it to be. Ruthie stepped forward, bare feet silent. Mama said you used to teach. I did. Will you teach me how to read the stories? Willa knelt. I will. Ruthie looked toward the field where her brother Illy was dragging a stick through the dirt. He don't sit still much. We'll find a way. By dusk, the shed had been swept clean. Willa had drawn letters into the dirt with the heel of her boot, and Ruthie had practiced copying them with a stick. When the wind picked up, they went inside. Xander returned with a coil of rope over his shoulder and dust on his hat brim. He paused when he saw the fire lit and Willa seated near it, Ruthie curled beside her, the reader open in Willa's lap. He didn't speak, just watched. "You ever read Plutarch?" she asked him. He shook his head. "Tried once, got put off by all the names." She smiled faintly. "It's not the names. It's the weight of the choices they made. You like stories about men who carried too much. I like stories about people who kept going anyway." He stepped inside, removed his hat, and hung it on the nail by the door. "That why you're still here?" She closed the book. "I'm here because Maggie needs me, but I'm staying because something about this place feels like it's waiting for me to belong to it." He stood there a moment, then sat beside the hearth, legs stretched out, back against the wall. "You're not the only one who's been waiting." She looked at him, really looked. "You said I'd know your name by sundown," she said, "but I think I started knowing it the moment you didn't ask me to explain myself." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Willa." She leaned forward slightly. "What? You said it like you were learning it, not like you'd always known it. I wanted to say it back like it belonged somewhere." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It does." They sat in the firelight, Ruthie asleep between them, the silence not empty, but full of something fragile and new. Outside, the wind whispered through the dry grass, and the desert settled around them like it had been holding its breath. The next few days passed with a rhythm that felt both new and necessary. Mornings began before the sun cleared the eastern ridge, with Willa at the stove and Ruthie helping Maggie sit upright to sip broth. He collected kindling in his small hands, proud of his contribution, even when the sticks were damp or crooked. Willa didn't correct him. Xander's presence shifted from occasional to expected. He didn't linger without reason, but he always brought something: a saddle-stitched primer, a fresh tin of lye soap, a coil of wire for the fence. He never announced his arrivals, and Willa never asked why he stayed. One afternoon, as she poured water into the trough behind the shed, she caught him watching her from a lean against the corner post. His hat was in his hand, the wind teasing his dark hair. "You need something?" she asked, wiping her palms on her skirt. He stepped forward. "Delaney's sending me to the canyon past tomorrow. A pair of heifers wandered through the West Gap, might be gone 2 nights. She nodded. "You'll be missed. I'll be back. You don't owe us anything." He met her eyes. "That's not why I come." Willa looked down at her boots, then out across the yard. "Do you ever think about starting over?" He shifted the hat in his hands. "Not much point in starting over, just start from where you are." She smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't." "But simple ain't the same as easy." He turned to go, but she stopped him. "Xander," he paused. "Will you come by before you ride out?" "I was planning to." That night, after the children were asleep and Maggie's soft snores drifted through the thin wall, Willa sat on the porch with a threadbare shawl around her shoulders. She didn't expect him, not that late, but she hoped. She wasn't used to hoping without bracing for disappointment. He came just before midnight, bootsteps quiet in the dust. He didn't speak right away. "I can't sleep," she said softly. "I saw your lamp. I keep it lit for the wind. It rattles the walls." He sat beside her, not touching, but close enough she felt the warmth of him. "I used to think I needed to become someone new to be worth anything," she said, "but this place, it doesn't ask that of me. It just asks that I show up." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "That's the only thing that counts, Willa, showing up when it's hard." She looked at him. "You make it easier." He didn't answer with words, just reached into his coat and pulled out a small, flat object wrapped in oiled paper. He handed it to her. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a silver brooch in the shape of a swallow, simple, unpolished, but finely made. "My mother wore it," he said. "She gave it to me before the war started, told me to give it to someone who made me feel like I'd come home." Willa didn't move. "You sure? I've never been more." She closed the paper around it and held it against her chest. "You'll be careful? I always am." She looked at him then, really saw him not as the man who helped build fences or keep the children busy or asked nothing in return, but as someone steady in a world that had never been kind to either of them. "Come back," she said. "I will." He stood then, and for the first time she reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation, his calloused fingers closing gently around hers. "I don't know what this is," she said. It's not something you have to name right away. She nodded, held his hand one breath longer, then let go. He disappeared into the dark, and she stayed on the porch until dawn broke soft over the ridge, the brooch still warm in her hand. Xander returned on the third evening, just as the last light bled out of the sky. Willa had been sitting at the table with Maggie, stitching a patch onto Ellie's trousers while Ruthie practiced letters in the corner. When the quiet knock came, Willa's hand stilled, needle paused mid-thread. She didn't speak. She only stood and opened the door. He looked road-worn but whole, dust clinging to his trousers and a small scrape on his jaw that hadn't been there before. He held a canvas sack in one hand. In the other, he carried a small wooden crate. "Saw a stand of wild pears near the basin," he said. "Didn't want them to go to waste." She stepped aside to let him in. He didn't hesitate. Ruthie looked up from her slate. "You missed 2 whole days." "I know," Xander said, setting the crate on the counter. "I tried to hurry." Ellie darted in from the other room. "Did you see any mountain cats?" "Just tracks," he said. "Big ones, but they were old." The boy nodded, satisfied. Willa watched him as he washed his hands in the basin, sleeves rolled, movements slower than usual. She noticed the way he winced, how his left shoulder didn't lift all the way. "You're hurt," she said, crossing to him. "Rope caught wrong when I was pulling one of the heifers out of the ravine," he replied, not meeting her gaze. "Sit," she said. "I'll wrap it." He hesitated. "Now," she added. He sat. She moved quietly, fetching a strip of muslin from the shelf and dampening it with whiskey. His shirt was already torn at the seam. She peeled it back carefully. The bruise beneath was deep violet, swollen from shoulder to collarbone. He didn't flinch when she touched it, but his jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have ridden like this." "Didn't want to let it heal without seeing you." She didn't answer. She just pressed the cloth gently, wrapping it snug. Her fingers paused just above his heart. "I thought about you," he said. Her hands stilled. Out past the pass. Nights were cold. Sky was clear. "I thought about you sitting here, raising Ruthie's letters, watching the stove, waiting for Maggie's breath to even out." He looked up at her. "I wanted to be back more than I've wanted anything in years." She straightened, tying off the dressing. "I thought about you too." He stood slowly, testing the weight of his arm. "I don't want to keep leaving, not unless I have to." Willa looked at him. "Then don't." They stood in the dim kitchen, the fire giving off a soft heat. In the next room, Maggie coughed once and settled again. Ruthie hummed quietly while she traced letters. Ellie played with a carved horse near the stove. "I've got a bunk out at Delaney's," Xander said. "But it's not home." Willa's voice was steady. "This place isn't much, but it's rooted." He nodded. "I've lived a long time without something to come home to, without someone to come home to." Ruthie came into the kitchen then, holding one of the pear halves. "Can we plant the seeds?" she asked. Willa met Xander's gaze. "We can." That night he didn't leave. He stayed in the shed, bedding down with a blanket and the stars through the slats in the roof. Willa brought him a lamp and a spare quilt, and when she handed them to him, their hands lingered. "I want this," she said quietly. "Not for now, for always." He held her gaze. "So do I." They said nothing more. There was no need. The days that followed stitched themselves into something whole. Maggie grew stronger, taking small steps around the house, folding laundry beside Willa, humming to herself. The children settled into routine, mornings spent in the school shed, afternoons helping around the homestead. Xander repaired the barn roof, built a new bench for the porch, and stayed every night after that first one. A month later, under a sky brushed with clouds and the scent of rain in the air, Willa and Xander were married beside the creek where the cottonwoods grew tall. Maggie stood beside her, thin but steady. Ruthie scattered wildflowers Willa had taught her to gather, and Ellie held the ring carved from juniper wood that Xander had whittled himself. When the brief vows were spoken and Willa's hand found Xander's, the wind quieted. It felt like the land itself paused, just long enough to grant them peace. They built a life marked by quiet things. A porch swing fashioned from old wagon wood, a pot of coffee shared before the children woke, the creak of the door when Xander came in from the fields and Willa turned with a soft smile that hadn't worn down with time. Years passed. The school shed grew into a proper room with benches and slates and a row of books that doubled every year. Willa taught the children of Rustwood to read, to reckon numbers, to speak with care. Xander worked the land, took in strays both cattle and human, and never left again. Maggie lived long enough to see Ruthie write her first story and Ellie take over the garden rows. When she passed, it was in her sleep, her hand in Willa's, her grandchildren curled nearby. The brooch Xander had given Willa stayed pinned to her collar, the silver bright from daily wear. She wore it not for ornament, but as sign of the life they had chosen and kept. They grew older together, not easily, not without days of dust storms or drought or broken fences, but they grew. They laughed in the evenings, danced when no one watched, and kissed as if time had never taken anything from them that they couldn't build again. And when the winds came through Rustwood, people said they always bent around the Zeller place, like even the weather knew it had no quarrel there.